Welcome to Intentus FCPA Group Login Shorts Overview of United Nations Conventions Against Corruption. You can download the text of the corruption at this website. Along with the text in whatever language you choose, you can download the technical guide, the legislative guide, rules for procedure, and the mechanism for review of implementation. Chapter 1 of the Convention talks about general provisions, the purpose, term, and application of the Convention. Chapter 2 covers preventative measures, the requirements of state parties to establish internal anti-corruption bodies, how the Convention applies to both public and private sectors, accounting and records, auditing, and other private standards for private companies, the active implementation of civil society and the prevention efforts, and measures to prevent money laundering. Chapter 3 covers criminalization and law enforcement. Law enforcement, state parties are required to implement laws to criminalize corruption, including the concealment, conversion, and transfer of criminal proceeds to other countries, the protection of both whistleblowers and witnesses. This is important because it criminalizes any retaliation against whistleblowers and witnesses, and remedies for corruptions. Chapter 4 talks about international cooperation between state parties, which is obligatory to assist in cross-border criminal matters, joint investigation, extradition of individuals to other countries for trial. This is important to note because even if your country doesn't have extradition treaties with other countries, individuals can now be extradited for corruption charges, and the transfer of individuals convicted of corruption to serve time in other countries. Chapter 5 talks about asset recovery. This is important, and we'll address this a little bit more later. Tracing, freezing, forfeiting, and returning of assets and funds obtained through corrupt activities, and the international cooperation in confiscation of assets. Chapter 6 is the technical assistance talks about technical assistance and training, also the exchange of information, the collection and analysis of statistical information on corruption. Chapter 7 talks about the implementation of the convention and for state and conferences of state parties. Chapter 8 is the final provisions, which is the rules of government and the settlement of disputes between state parties. United Nations Convention Against Corruption signature and ratification status as of September 27, 2013 looks like this. The blue countries are countries that have ratified. They are state parties. The orange countries are countries that have only signed the convention. The red countries are countries that have neither signed nor ratified. Usually they come around. So what's the difference between signing and ratifying? Orange countries, as we mentioned, are signatory, countries who have only signed. There's no legal obligation imposed on a signatory state. Signing indicates an intention to be bound by the treaty at a later date and a promise to refrain from acts that violate the convention protocols. The blue countries are state parties. These are countries that have ratified. These states become legally bound by the treaty to implement the convention protocols. Ratification at the national level means that the state may have to ratify in accordance with the Constitution or existing legal provisions to prevent a conflict of law before it ratifies internationally. Let's look at Saudi Arabia as an example. January 2004, Saudi Arabia became a signatory to the convention. In 2011, following with the convention protocols, Saudi Arabia established the Nazaha anti-corruption body within its own country. In January 2013, Saudi Arabia ratified the convention nationally by royal decree. In April 29, 2013, Saudi Arabia ratified internationally. So if a country becomes a state party by ratifying the convention, how do you know if they're really serious about anti-corruption? By watching what's going on in the headlines and the courtrooms. Since Saudi Arabia ratified this year, the headlines have been full of corruption cases and incidents that have been in the headlines. That's how you can tell Saudi Arabia is serious. Why would any country ratify an international convention that legally binds it to somebody else's laws? Governments recognize that corruption is damaging to their own economy. World Bank Organization estimates that $9 trillion is lost globally by corruption activities. Asset recovery from other countries. Remember, we mentioned that in Chapter 5 of the Convention. It's very important. If somebody steals money, embezzles, or gains millions of dollars through corrupt behavior in your country and somehow manages to move those assets to another country, you will rely on the cooperation of that government in order to get those funds back. So there's a lot of global pressure for countries to collaborate their efforts and cooperate. The desire to attract more business to their country. Countries that don't have strong anti-corruption enforcement are less desirable to do business in because the risk is higher. Anti-corruption compliance programs are considered part of risk management and corporate social responsibility. So now we know what the convention is, we know who signed it, we know pretty much how it works and why companies or countries would want to sign it. What does that mean for your company? What's your company's role under the convention? Your company's role is to uphold your government's commitment to it, making sure that your company, your organization does its part and has its corruption compliance program in place. Who's responsible for it? Is it the shareholders, the directors, the CEO, the CFO? Is it the general auditor or the general counsel or VPs, management, employees? The answer is everyone, because everyone benefits if you have a program in place and everyone loses if you don't. Even if you're just an employee, if your company doesn't have its compliance program in place, you need to lobby for it. Discuss this matter with your management and bring to their attention the need for it. So what if we don't have a program? And what if we have a program but it doesn't meet the convention guidelines? What's the worst that can happen? You'll be less likely to detect corruption in your company. Studies have shown, statistical analysis have shown that general auditing catches less than 15% of corruption incidents, and usually only after they've been occurring for 18 months or longer. You'll be less effective in responding to incidents of corruption. Your company has legal obligations when it comes to criminal activity that take place inside the organization. You are legally obliged to respond and report those incidents to the proper authorities. And if it's not in your policy, too much can be swept under the rug. Your company may end up in the headlines in the courtroom, and your executives could end up in prison. If you look at the studies of some of the biggest headlines, some of those executives didn't go to jail because they actually committed the crime. They actually were fined and found guilty because they didn't do enough to prevent it. Criminal and civil fines will be in the hundreds of millions. Companies that have been charged with corruption charges have found that when they have a program in place, sometimes their liability can be greatly diminished or even eliminated, and only the individuals can be held responsible. And your company will be ordered by the court to put one in anyways. No law enforcement agency in the world expects one executive or one company to stop corruption by themselves. They only expect each of us to do our part. So do your part to stop corruption. This has been brought to you by Intentus FCPA Group, the compliance people. You can visit our website at fcpagroup.com. If you have any suggestions for future topics for Vlogging Shorts or questions about how to either implement or develop your company's anti-corruption compliance program, feel free to contact us at contact@fcpagroup.com. Additional resources and information for the United Nations Conventions Against Corruption can be found at the United Nations website or at Transparency